Happy Friday out there, folks. This is Darius Dale here to present our macro minute for Friday, April 8th, 2022. Starting with markets here, we have stocks up this morning, commodities up as well, crypto mix, dollar up, global bond yields flat to up. Market moving headlines. We have European Union countries finally agreed to ban coal imports from Russia. This is the first time the economic bloc sanctions have targeted Russia's energy revenues. Shifting gears, the latest data from the UN shows food prices are actually surging at the fastest pace ever. That's obviously an issue as you think about going back to the Arab Spring of 2011 and the impact that that's having on poor countries and emerging markets, et cetera. That's obviously coming home to roost here in developed world as well. Another headline: Shanghai, China just reached a daily new high in terms of Shanghai COVID cases at 21,000. It's obviously a small number, but the lockdown there, and it looks like it's intensifying in terms of the government's response, in terms of getting people off the streets and everything. There's a lot of actually backlash from social media for the first time in China we've seen throughout the COVID crisis. And then shifting gears, last night obviously is kind of the key headlines of the day, but just wanted to reiterate on the program here. St. Louis Fed President Jim Bullard sort of said he prefers getting the policy rate to 3 to 3.5% by the end of the year. That's obviously almost a double relative to the March summary of economic projections. So that's a big deal. And then lastly, you had Atlanta Fed President Raphael Bostic and Chicago Fed President Charles Evans. They came out and effectively said, yeah, they want to get rates to neutral by year end, but they also want to do it at a kind of a measured pace to monitor the economy's performance. So that those comments are what kind of saved the market yesterday. Big movers this morning. You have Germany's DAX up 1%, Bloomberg Industrial Metals Index up 1% as well. Ethereum also up 1%. So kind of a quiet ho-hum day after what has been quite an eventful week. Taking it to the charts this morning, flying through the VAMs and probable ranges, volatility adjusted momentum signal and probable range model. Looking at the US dollar, that is still bullish VAMs with 1.3% of downside in its probable range versus 0.5% of upside. Gold still neutral VAMs, kind of just been trading flat for the last couple of weeks here, minus 3% of downside versus 3% of upside in its probable range. So kind of a fair fight there in gold. 10-year nominal Treasury yield, that is still bullish VAMs, ragingly bullish VAMs, minus 36 basis points of downside versus only 12 basis points of upside. High yield OAS kind of in the middle of its range still, that's bullish VAMs, minus 27 basis points of downside versus 23 basis points of upside. S&P 500, that is bullish VAM still narrowly. Don't believe it's going to stay in the bullish VAM state, so this is probably a good spot to short. But for now, the probable range is saying there's only 1% of downside versus 4.7% of upside. As you know, or for those of you who don't know, the probable range process is quantitatively linked to the VAM signal. So if this turns back to neutral or bearish, you're going to get more skew to the downside in the probable range. That's why I'm making that comment there. Same thing with the VIX. VIX looks like it's overbought here at bearish VAMs. I'm not sure it's going to be able to hold that signal in the context of our forward-looking macro reviews, which you can subscribe and find out. That's bearish VAMs, though, for now. Minus 31% of downside versus 9% of upside. NASDAQ neutral VAMs, minus 3% of downside versus 6% of upside in its probable range. Russell 2000 neutral VAMs as well, minus 1.5% of downside versus 7% of upside there. Bitcoin neutral VAMs getting close to oversold here, minus 2% of downside versus 13% of upside. So looking like a good spot to add to Bitcoin for those of you who are bullish at the Bitcoin conference down here in Miami. Ethereum neutral VAMs as well, kind of more in the middle of its range with 7% of downside versus 12% of upside. Shanghai Composite, bearish VAM still minus 4% of downside versus only 1.3% of upside. So if you're a China bear, be a good spot to short. Good risk reward there. WTI crude oil, neutral VAMs, a lot more upside versus downside in its probable range. Minus 4% of downside versus 23% of upside. You know, I've been saying this on crude oil. A lot of what we've seen in the recent, couple of months or here is we're not even, almost a couple of months is geopolitical risk, but there's been a underlying bull trend to the crude oil price that I think is likely to continue here. And obviously, as we, with this kind of upside downside and its probable range process, if you have the confidence and the patience, this is a great spot to start adding back some crude oil exposure to the extent of you taking down that risk over the last couple of weeks and months. Agricultural neutral VAMs, kind of in the middle of its probable range, 4% of downside versus 4% of upside. And then lastly, industrial metals, same deal, neutral VAMs, minus 6% of downside versus 5% of upside. So with that, Darius Dale presenting our macro minute for Friday, April 8th, 2022. Thank you. Have a great weekend. Catch you back here on Monday.